Widowed soldier inherits grandmother's poor mountain cabin, but what he finds inside, Marcus Benjamin Mitchell held the crumpled notary paper while contemplating the dirt road that climbed up the Appalachian Mountains. 67 years old, widowed for 2 years, retired from the army for 5, and now he discovered he had inherited a property he believed had been sold decades ago. The notary's call still echoed in his mind. His grandmother Dorothy's stone cabin, that rustic construction where he had spent a few childhood summers, was rightfully his. His daughter Jennifer had begged him not to go alone, but Marcus was stubborn by nature, and loneliness had become his constant companion since he lost Margaret. The military jeep he bought after retirement climbed slowly up the uneven trail. The dense morning fog enveloped the Appalachian peaks like a grey cloak, and Marcus felt a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. He hadn't visited that place in over 40 years. When he finally spotted the stone cabin, his heart raced. The rough stone walls were covered in moss. The red tile roof had a few holes where small plants grew, but the structure remained solid. The wooden door, painted green many years ago, was slightly ajar. Marcus parked the jeep and got out slowly, feeling the weight of the backpack on his shoulders. He wore his usual navy blue jacket, the one Margaret said made his grey hair look nicer. The damp grass cushioned his steps as he approached the entrance. He pushed the door carefully, and it creaked on rusty hinges. The interior was dark, but a beam of sunlight filtered through the small window, illuminating dust dancing in the air. The smell was of a house long closed, mixed with something he couldn't identify. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then he saw something that made him stop in the middle of the room. On the rustic wooden table, piles and piles of yellowed letters were organized in groups, letters that had clearly been opened and read many times, as the edges were worn from handling. He approached slowly and picked up one of the letters from the top. The envelope was addressed to a certain Santos family, 123 Blossom Street, Asheville. The handwriting was his grandmother Dorothy's. He immediately recognized that delicate, slanted penmanship. He opened the letter with trembling hands and began to read, "My dear children, I hope this letter finds you in health and joy. I know times have been hard since Thomas lost his job, but do not worry. Next Friday, as always, I will leave a basket with provisions on your back porch. The children need proper nutrition to grow strong." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He continued reading. "Do not feel embarrassed to accept this small help. God has blessed us with abundance, so we may share with our brothers and sisters. Always remember that you are not alone on this journey. With maternal affection, Grandma Dorothy." The date at the top of the letter was from just 3 years ago. Marcus sat down heavily on the wooden chair, trying to process what he was seeing. His grandmother, whom he had always considered a simple and humble woman, living on a modest retirement, was helping needy families. He picked up another letter from a different pile. This one was addressed to Mrs. Dorothy Williams, Workers' District, Gatlinburg. The content was similar, words of encouragement, a promise of material help, and signed with the same maternal affection. With a racing heart, Marcus began to examine the other piles. There were letters to at least 30 different families, all from the Appalachian Mountains region. Each group of letters was tied with a little colored ribbon, and he realized the colors corresponded to different times of the year. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. He stood up and began to explore the cabin more thoroughly. In the left corner of the room, he discovered an improvised bookshelf made of planks and bricks. On the shelves were accounting notebooks, all in his grandmother's same meticulous handwriting. He opened the first notebook and found detailed lists. Santos family, 4 children, father unemployed, mother a cleaner. Needs, powdered milk, diapers for the baby, asthma medication for the oldest girl. Then a note. Delivered on 03/15, full basket plus medicines. He flipped through the pages and saw that each family had a detailed file. His grandmother knew all the children's names, knew their specific difficulties, noted birthdays, health problems, and school achievements. In one of the notebooks, he found a section titled Income and Expenses. His grandmother meticulously documented every penny spent on her charitable activities. She sold homemade sweets at the neighboring town's market, did sewing work for local people, and even raised chickens to sell the eggs. "How did I never know about this?" he murmured to himself, feeling a mix of admiration and guilt. In his grandmother's later years, he visited her less and less, always in a hurry, always with the excuse that military life didn't allow for much leisure. He walked to the small kitchen and noticed the cabinets were organized differently than he remembered. Instead of normal dishes and utensils, there were shelves full of non-perishable goods: cans of powdered milk, packages of sugar, cooking oil, laundry detergent, diapers of various sizes. At the back of the kitchen, a door he didn't remember existing led to a small storage room. Inside, clothes for all ages were carefully separated and folded. There were handwritten labels: boy 8-10 years, girl 2 to 4 years, adult man, elderly woman. Marcus picked up one of the shirts from the men's pile and immediately recognized the fabric. It was one of his own shirts, which he had given to his grandmother years ago when it no longer fit. At the time, he thought she would use it as a cleaning rag, but now he saw it had been carefully washed, ironed, and set aside for someone in need. Returning to the main room, he noticed something he had initially overlooked. On the wall opposite the letters, there was a mural made of photographs, cards, and children's drawings. He approached and saw they were pictures of smiling families, thank you letters, and colorful drawings made by children. One of the cards caught his attention. It was from a child with large, clumsy letters. "Grandma Dorothy, thank you for helping me buy my school supplies. Now I can study like the other boys. You are an angel. With love, Tommy." Another card, this one in simple but adult handwriting. "Mrs. Dorothy, I don't know how to thank you for the basket you left at our door. My children ate well for the first time in 2 weeks. You saved our family. God will reward such kindness. Eternally grateful, Grace Mitchell." Marcus felt his eyes well up. His grandmother, that woman he judged as just a simple country lady, had built an entire support network for families in need. And he, in his military and urban arrogance, had never noticed. Walking back to the table with the letters, he noticed an envelope different from the others. It was thicker and had his name written on the front. "For my grandson, Marcus Benjamin, when the right time comes." With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter several pages long and a small golden key. "My dear grandson," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I have already departed from this earthly life, and you have finally come to learn the true purpose of this cabin. I know you always saw me as a poor and simple woman, and in material terms perhaps I was indeed, but there is a wealth that money cannot buy, my son, the joy of serving others." Marcus had to stop reading for a moment. His grandmother's voice seemed to echo in that quiet space, and he could almost see her sitting in that same chair, writing those words with the same tenderness with which she wrote to families in need. He continued, "I know the last few years have been difficult for you, especially after you lost your dear Margaret. I saw the pain in your eyes during her funeral, a pain I know well, for I also lost the love of my life, your grandfather Harold. Loneliness can be a heavy burden, or it can be transformed into fuel to love even more the people who cross our path." The letter went on to explain how it all began. 15 years ago, during an especially severe storm, his grandmother had found a family camped under the overhang of the local church. The parents had lost their home in a flood and were there with 3 small children with nowhere to go. "I brought them here for 1 night, Dorothy wrote, "but 1 night turned into a week, and a week opened my eyes to how many families were enduring silent hardships in our region. I decided that, as long as I had strength and resources, no child would go hungry or cold if I could prevent it." Marcus discovered that his grandmother had developed an elaborate system. She kept in touch with local priests and pastors who would discreetly refer families in need. She also corresponded with teachers from the rural schools who knew well the reality of the children. "I never did this for recognition or gratitude," the letter continued, "but because I learned that God gave us resources and abilities to be shared. Every family I helped taught me something about courage, about resilience, about the beauty of starting over, even when everything seems lost." His grandmother also explained about the small key that came with the letter. It opened a box buried beneath the large stone behind the cabin. Inside that box were her savings, the money she had saved over the years from her extra jobs, specifically set aside to continue the charitable work. "I do not know if you will choose to continue what I started here," Dorothy wrote, "but I know you have a good heart, even if life has hardened it a little. Your experience as a soldier taught you to protect and serve, qualities that translate perfectly to caring for vulnerable families. If you decide to follow another path, I do not judge you. But if you feel the call to continue, know that I have already organized everything to ease your journey." The last lines of the letter made Marcus weep openly. "Always remember, my dear grandson, that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we give. Your Margaret would understand this better than anyone. She was always generous of heart, and I know she would approve if you transformed your pain into a source of healing for others. With all my love and my blessings, your grandmother who never stopped believing in you, Dorothy." Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket, close to his heart. For the first time in 2 years, since he had lost Margaret, he felt something beyond emptiness and bitterness. He felt a spark of purpose, a faint feeling that perhaps his life could still have meaning. He left the cabin holding the small golden key and walked to the back of the property. The large stone was there, exactly as he remembered from childhood, now covered in moss and small plants. At the base of the rock, almost hidden by vegetation, he found a small metal hatch. The key fit perfectly. Inside the metal box, besides an envelope with money, there were other documents. Bank records showing a modest but significant savings account by a retired lady's standards. There was also an updated list of all the families his grandmother assisted, with addresses, current situations, and upcoming anticipated needs. One of the papers caught his attention. It was a rudimentary, hand-drawn map of the region, with markings indicating the homes of each assisted family. His grandmother had traced efficient routes for her deliveries, calculating distances and times to optimize her aid trips. While examining the documents, Marcus heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He quickly put the papers back in his backpack and looked toward the trail. A woman of about 50 was climbing toward the cabin, carrying a basket covered with a colorful cloth. "Good morning," she called out, waving. "You must be Mrs. Dorothy's grandson." Marcus approached, intrigued. The woman had tired features but a warm smile. She wore simple but clean clothes, and her eyes shone with a mix of curiosity and emotion. "Yes, that's me," replied Marcus. "And you are?" "Helen Parker. I live in the yellow house down in the valley," she said, pointing down the mountain. "Your grandmother helped me for years, ever since my husband got sick. When I saw the jeep here, I thought it might be you." Helen put the basket on the ground and looked at Marcus with teary eyes. "Mrs. Dorothy talked about you so much. She was so proud of her soldier grandson. She always said you protected the whole country, while she just protected our small community." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "Mrs. Helen, I didn't know about the work my grandmother did here." "You didn't know?" Helen seemed genuinely surprised, "but she always talked as if you were in constant contact. She knew details about your military life, about your wife, about your daughter." The revelation hit Marcus like a punch. His grandmother had followed his life even from a distance, probably through his mother or other relatives, but she had never mentioned it during his sporadic visits. She knew about his career, his marriage, his struggles, but he knew nothing about the most important work of her life. "I brought some homemade bread," said Helen, uncovering the basket. "I thought you might be hungry after your trip. It's the least I can do to thank everything your family has done for mine." "Your family?" asked Marcus. Helen nodded. "When my husband Anthony discovered he had diabetes and couldn't work in construction anymore, we went through a very difficult time. 3 small children, expensive medicine, and I could only get cleaning work 2 days a week. That's when Mrs. Dorothy came into our lives." The woman sat on one of the rocks near the cabin, as if preparing to tell a long story. "She started by leaving baskets on our porch in the early morning. We thought it was someone from the church, but we never found out who it was. Until one night, I woke up to a noise and saw your grandmother organizing the groceries." Helen smiled fondly. "When I confronted her, she was embarrassed, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. But I insisted she come in for coffee, and that's how our friendship began. She wasn't just generous with material resources, but with time, advice, and affection. My children called her their borrowed grandma, Helen continued. She came here every week, always with something. Sometimes food, sometimes medicine, sometimes just a conversation to cheer me up when I was too discouraged to keep fighting. Marcus listened in silence, each word confirming what he had discovered in the letters and documents. Your grandmother had built genuine relationships. She didn't just hand out material help. When my youngest son broke his arm, and we needed to pay for a private x-ray because the health clinic had no equipment, Mrs. Dorothy showed up with the exact money. When my oldest daughter won a scholarship but needed a uniform and school supplies, she provided everything. Helen wiped a tear with the back of her hand. She always said it wasn't charity but rather one family looking after another. She said God had blessed her with resources to share, and that we also blessed her life with our friendship and gratitude. And how did she manage to fund all this? Asked Marcus, still trying to understand the magnitude of his grandmother's operation. Oh, Mrs. Dorothy was a very hard worker, Helen replied with admiration. She made sweets and savory snacks to order for parties in the region. She sewed clothes for people in town. She raised chickens and sold eggs. She made homemade liqueurs that were in high demand. And she never spent money on frivolities. Everything that was left over was directed to helping the families. Helen stood up and walked to the side of the cabin. Come see something, she said, waving for Marcus to follow her. At the back of the property there was a small shed that Marcus hadn't noticed before. Helen opened the wooden door and revealed an organized space with woodworking tools, an old but well-maintained sewing machine and shelves full of finished products. She made simple furniture to order, explained Helen. Tables, chairs, basic shelves. Nothing too elaborate but well-made and cheap. People in the region sought her out when they needed furniture but didn't have much money to spend. Marcus examined one of the chairs on the workbench. The finish was simple, but the workmanship was solid and careful. His grandmother, in her 70s, still worked with wood to generate extra income for her charitable activities. She never accepted payment for direct help to the families, Helen continued, but she accepted work orders. She said that way she maintained everyone's dignity. She worked to earn the money she later shared, and the families didn't feel like beggars. Returning to the front of the cabin, Helen looked at Marcus with hope. Do you plan to continue her work? The question caught Marcus off guard. He was still processing everything he had discovered. I don't know yet. I need to better understand how it all worked. Helen nodded understandingly. It's a lot to take in at once, I imagine, but know that there's an entire community here waiting to meet you. Mrs. Dorothy always said that one day you would come and that perhaps you could carry on what she started. How many families did she help regularly? Asked Marcus. About 30 families received constant help, Helen answered, but she also occasionally helped other people going through temporary hardships. At Christmas time, she organized a party here at the cabin for all the children in the region. It was the most anticipated event of the year for the little ones. Helen began to say goodbye, but before leaving, she made one final observation. She missed your grandfather the most, especially in the last few months. She said she wished she had talked more with you about what she was doing here, but she was afraid you would think she was spending money unnecessarily. After Helen left, Marcus was alone again with his discoveries and reflections. He sat on the rock where the woman had sat and contemplated the mountainous landscape. The fog was dissipating, revealing a green valley dotted with small, simple houses. Each of those houses represented a family his grandmother knew by name, whose stories and needs she followed closely. The contrast with his own life in recent years was stark. He had isolated himself in his loneliness and bitterness, while his grandmother had multiplied her relationships and positive impact. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Jennifer, his daughter. Dad, where are you? I'm worried. You left early and didn't say when you'd be back. I'm at Grandma Dorothy's cabin, sweetheart. You made it there. So, how's the property? Is it worth fixing up to sell? Marcus hesitated before answering. How could he explain in a few words everything he had discovered? Jennifer, I need to stay here a few more days. There are Some of Grandma's things I need to sort out. What kind of things, Dad? Old furniture? Documents? I can hire a cleaning company to handle all that quickly. It's not that, sweetheart. Marcus searched for the right words. I found out your great-grandmother was involved in activities I didn't know about. I need to understand the situation better before making any decision about the property. Jennifer was silent for a moment. Dad, are you okay? You're not getting overly sentimental about this cabin, are you? We know it has sentimental value, but we can't be guided only by emotion. Jennifer, your great-grandmother was helping dozens of needy families in the area. She maintained a whole organized system of social assistance. Dad? Jennifer's voice sounded skeptical. Are you sure? Grandma Dorothy was a simple lady. She didn't have the means to do that kind of thing on a large scale. His daughter's reaction irritated Marcus. It was exactly the same prejudice he himself had held until just a few hours ago. Jennifer, I'm looking at the documents, the letters, the records. It's not something I'm making up. All right, Dad. But even if that's true, it doesn't mean you have to continue this activity. You've already done your part serving the country all these years. Now you deserve to rest and enjoy your retirement. After ending the call, Marcus reflected on his daughter's reaction. Jennifer had inherited his military practicality, but perhaps she had lost some of the sensitivity that Margaret had always shown. His wife would certainly understand the dilemma he was facing. He decided to spend the night at the cabin. There was a small room in the back with a simple bed, and he had brought some clothes in his backpack. He wanted more time to absorb everything he had discovered and think calmly about the next steps. Later in the afternoon, 2 more people appeared at the cabin. An elderly couple, Thomas and Grace Mitchell, residents of a small nearby farm. They brought fresh eggs and milk, explaining it was their way of thanking Mrs. Dorothy for everything she had done for their family. When our grandson got sick and needed expensive medicine for pneumonia, Mrs. Dorothy showed up with the exact amount of money, said Thomas, a thin man of about 70. She never asked when we'd pay it back, never insisted on recognition. She just said it was important to take care of our children. Grace Mitchell, a petite woman with a sweet gaze, added, she had a gift for appearing exactly when we needed it most. It was as if she had a sixth sense for noticing when a family was going through hard times. The couple stayed almost an hour talking with Marcus, sharing story after story about his grandmother's generosity. Each account reinforced the image of a woman who had dedicated the last years of her life to serving her community in a quiet and effective way. When they left, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus lit a kerosene lamp he found in the cabin. Apparently his grandmother preferred simple lighting methods, and prepared a basic dinner with the provisions he had brought. As he ate, he leafed through his grandmother's notebooks by the lamp's light. Each page revealed new details about the families assisted, new examples of the meticulous organization with which she conducted her charitable work. One note in particular caught his attention. Oliveira family. Father lost job at the factory. 3 young children. Mother pregnant with 4th. Very delicate situation. Need to increase delivery frequency and look for work opportunity for the father. Then, a few weeks later, managed to refer Mr. Oliveira for work on the new bridge construction. Family more stable, but still need to monitor due to baby expenses coming up. Months later, baby born healthy. Oliveira family now able to support themselves, but I keep in touch for emergencies. It's rewarding to see a family get back on their feet. Marcus realized his grandmother didn't just provide temporary assistance, but followed the long-term progress of each family, helping them regain autonomy whenever possible. In another notebook, he found a section dedicated to special projects. His grandmother had documented initiatives like organizing volunteer crews to repair houses damaged by storms, creating community gardens for families with little access to fresh food, and even a small interest-free loan system for families who needed capital to start small businesses. How did she manage to do all this alone? He murmured to himself, impressed by the breadth and sophistication of his grandmother's activities. The answer came when he found a list of volunteer collaborators. His grandmother had mobilized a network of people from the region, from other elderly ladies who helped with sewing and cooking, to young people who assisted with deliveries and heavier physical work. She had become a natural leader of a community solidarity movement. As the night progressed, Marcus felt increasingly uncomfortable with his own choices of recent years. While his grandmother multiplied her capacity to help others through partnerships and organization, he had closed himself off in his own pain, rejecting attempts by friends and family to reach out. Margaret had always been generous with her time and resources, participating in support groups at church, organizing charity drives in the neighborhood. After her departure, Marcus had abandoned all those activities, considering them irrelevant in the face of his personal loss. Now, reading about his grandmother's tireless work, he wondered if he hadn't wasted 2 valuable years that could have been dedicated to honoring Margaret's memory through service to others. Around 10 at night, he heard footsteps and voices approaching the cabin. Through the small window, he saw lantern lights coming up the trail. Moments later, a soft knock at the door. "Mr. Marcus, are you in there?" "Yes, come in," he replied, opening the door. 3 people entered, a young man about 25, a woman the same age, and a child of about 8. They all carried lanterns and looked a bit nervous. "Good evening, Mr. Marcus," said the young man. "I'm Julian. This is my wife, Carol, and our daughter, Anne. We're from the Santos family." The name sounded familiar. Marcus remembered the letters he had read earlier. The Santos family was one his grandmother regularly assisted. We came to ask something," Julian continued, clearly uncomfortable. "We know it may not be our place, and you may have other plans for this property, but—" "Please go on," encouraged Marcus. Carol stepped forward. "We lost our house last month. The landlord raised the rent in a way we couldn't afford, and we had to leave. We're staying with relatives as a favor, but we can't remain for long." The little girl, Anne, hid behind her mother, looking at Marcus with curious but cautious eyes. "Mrs. Dorothy always said that in emergencies families could stay temporarily here in the cabin," said Julian. "We don't know if that offer still stands with you, sir, but we're desperate. We have nowhere to go, and Carol is 6 months pregnant." The situation caught Marcus completely off guard. He hadn't considered that the cabin could serve as temporary shelter for families in emergency situations. Once again, he was discovering aspects of his grandmother's work he hadn't imagined. "How long would you need to stay?" he asked, trying to buy time to think. "Maybe 2 weeks," replied Carol. "Julian has a possibility of a job at Mr. Anthony's farm, but it will only be confirmed next week. If he gets the job, we'll be able to rent a small house in the village." Marcus looked at the young family. Julian had the calloused hands of someone who did hard work, but his eyes showed honesty and determination. Carol, even pregnant and clearly tired, maintained her dignity and upright posture. The little girl Anne watched him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Did you know my grandmother well?" he asked. "Mrs. Dorothy saved our family," replied Carol with emotion. "When Anne was 2 and got very sick, we needed to take her to the hospital in the capital. The doctors said if we had waited 1 more day, she could have, well, it could have been very serious." "We didn't have money for the trip or the medicine," Julian continued. "Mrs. Dorothy not only lent us the money, but came with us to the hospital. She stayed for 3 days taking care of Anne, while Carol and I took turns working to pay the expenses." Anne came out from behind her mother and looked at Marcus. "Grandma Dorothy taught me how to make beaded bracelets," she said in a small but clear voice. "She said when I grew up, I could make them to sell and help my family." Marcus's heart tightened. How could he deny temporary shelter to a family his own grandmother had helped? At the same time, he felt completely unprepared to handle the situation. "Look," he finally said, "I need to be honest with you. I just found out about the work my grandmother did here. I'm still trying to understand how everything worked, and I don't know if I'm in a position to continue what she started." The expression of hope on the Santos family's faces gradually turned to disappointment and resignation. "But," Marcus continued, "you can stay tonight. Tomorrow, we'll try to find a more definite solution for your situation." The relief was immediate and visible. "Thank you so much, Mr. Marcus," said Julian, extending his hand. "We promise we won't be a bother, and we'll leave everything spotless." Carol approached and gently touched Marcus's arm. "You have the same good heart as Mrs. Dorothy. She always said kindness runs in families from generation to generation. After organizing the space to accommodate the Santos family, they settled in the main room while Marcus kept the small bedroom. He lay down, but couldn't sleep immediately. Through the thin wall, he could hear the young couple's quiet conversation, planning how to look for work the next day, discussing strategies to save even more money, expressing gratitude for the chance to spend at least one night in a safe place. The situation made him think of Margaret. His wife would never hesitate to help a family in need. During their years of marriage, their home had been a temporary shelter for various people in difficulty. Young soldiers away from home, families of military colleagues going through financial crises, even strangers whom Margaret found in vulnerable situations. She always said that God had blessed their homes with stability so they could share that stability with others. Marcus sometimes thought she was too generous, but now he realized that his wife and his grandmother shared the same understanding about the purpose of prosperity. The next morning, he woke up early and found the Santos family already organizing their few belongings. Carol was preparing a simple breakfast in the small kitchen, using the provisions she had brought in her own luggage. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus," greeted Julian. "We hope you slept well. We'll be leaving shortly so as not to disrupt your plans." "Where are you going?" asked Marcus. "We're going to try Mr. Anthony's farm early today," replied Julian. "If it doesn't work out, maybe we can stay one more night at Carol's relative's house." Marcus realized he couldn't simply let that family go without a certain destination. "Look, I'm thinking of staying a few more days here to organize my grandmother's things. You can continue staying until you sort out your work and housing situation." The family's relief and gratitude were touching. Anne ran to him and hugged him spontaneously, a gesture that moved him deeply. "We can help with anything you need to do here," offered Carol. "I know how to cook, clean, organize documents." "Actually, there is one thing," said Marcus, remembering the notebooks and letters. "Do you know other families my grandmother helped?" "We know almost all of them," replied Julian. "Mrs. Dorothy always organized occasional gatherings so families could get to know each other. She said that way we created a mutual support network." "Do you think they would like to talk to me? I'm trying to better understand how everything worked." Carol and Julian exchanged glances. "Absolutely," said Carol. "In fact, many families are worried about what will happen now. Mrs. Dorothy was, well, she was like a guardian angel to many people." Julian offered to accompany Marcus on visits to the families, knowing the area and the people well. They agreed to start at Helen's house, which Marcus had already met, and then visit other families from his grandmother's list. The first stop was at Helen's yellow house in the valley. It was a simple but well-kept building, with a small garden in front where colorful flowers and some vegetables grew. Helen welcomed them with joy, clearly happy to see that Marcus was taking an interest in the community. "It's good you brought Julian," she said. "He can explain better than I can how Mrs. Dorothy organized things." During the conversation, Marcus learned that his grandmother had created a rotating visit system. Each family had a specific day of the week when they could count on her presence, but she also kept herself available for emergencies at any time. "She didn't just bring things," explained Helen. "Often she came just to talk, to listen to our problems, to give advice based on her life experience." Julian added, "Mrs. Dorothy had a special wisdom for resolving conflicts. When there were misunderstandings between neighbors or within families, people sought her out to mediate." The next visit was to the Oliveira family's house, which Marcus had read about in the notebooks. They found a much more stable situation than he expected. The father had secured steady work in construction, and the family had moved to a larger house. "But we never forget that it was Mrs. Dorothy who gave us the strength not to give up in the most difficult moments," said the mother, Sally. "When we thought we wouldn't be able to overcome the difficulties, she would appear with a word of encouragement and the practical help we needed." Throughout the afternoon, they visited 5 more families. Each had a similar story, moments of crisis where their grandmother had provided not only material assistance, but emotional and practical support to overcome hardships. The pattern that emerged was clear. Mrs. Dorothy did not create dependency, but rather offered temporary support while families reorganized to regain their autonomy. She understood that true help was that which empowered people to help themselves. One of the most impactful visits was to the home of Mrs. Mary, a 68-year-old widow raising 2 orphaned grandchildren alone. Her small house was immaculately clean, but it was evident that resources were very limited. "Mrs. Dorothy was like a sister to me," said Mary, with tears in her eyes. "We lost our husbands around the same time, and she understood the pain of widowhood like few others could." Mary's grandchildren, a 10-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl, showed Marcus some drawings they had made for Mrs. Dorothy. The drawings depicted a smiling lady surrounded by many children, with the caption "Everyone's Grandma" written in colored pencils. "She said that even if we didn't have much money, we could always be rich in love and care for each other," the girl, Marina, shared. Returning to the cabin in the late afternoon, Marcus felt emotionally exhausted but also strangely rejuvenated. For the first time in 2 years, he had spent an entire day focused on the needs of others instead of ruminating on his own sadness. The Santos family had tidied the cabin and prepared a simple dinner with ingredients they found in the pantry. "We hope you don't mind," said Carol. "We wanted to repay a little of the hospitality." During dinner, Anne asked Marcus about his life as a soldier. "Grandma Dorothy always said you protected many important people. Is it true that soldiers are brave?" The girl's innocent question made him reflect. "Soldiers learn to serve and protect," he replied. "But I've met many brave people who were never soldiers. Your borrowed grandmother, for example, was one of the bravest people I've ever known." "Why was Grandma Dorothy brave?" asked Anne. Marcus thought for a moment. "Because she dedicated her entire life to caring for people who needed help, even when it meant personal sacrifice for her. That kind of courage is very rare." That night, after the Santos family settled down to sleep, Marcus went out onto the cabin porch and gazed at the stars. The sky was clear, and the Milky Way stretched like a bright band across its expanse. Margaret always liked to look at the stars. On warm summer nights, they used to sit on their home's porch and talk about their plans, their dreams, their gratitude. She always said the stars reminded her of how small their personal problems were compared to the vastness of the universe. "Margaret," he murmured to the stars, "I think I'm beginning to understand something you always tried to teach me. Perhaps our pain can be turned into a source of healing for others." The next morning, he woke to the sound of voices outside the cabin. Through the window, he saw that several people were arriving: men, women, elderly, young people, some children. Carol was at the door talking with them. "Mr. Marcus," she called when she saw him approaching, "several families have come wanting to meet you." The group consisted of representatives from nearly all the families his grandmother helped. They had organized to bring supplies and prepare a community lunch at the cabin as a way to thank everything Mrs. Dorothy had done and to get to know her grandson better. "We thought you might like to hear a bit about how Mrs. Dorothy impacted our lives," said Thomas, the gentleman who had visited the afternoon before. Throughout the morning, while the women prepared lunch and the children played around the cabin, Marcus listened to story after story. Each family had multiple examples of moments when his grandmother had made the difference between despair and hope, between giving up and perseverance. A young man of about 20, Richard, told how Mrs. Dorothy had funded his technical course in electronics when his family couldn't afford it. "Today I work in the city and can support my widowed mother," he said, "all because Mrs. Dorothy believed in my potential when I didn't even believe in it myself." A lady named Nancy shared how his grandmother had mediated a family conflict that had lasted years, bringing together siblings who hadn't spoken in decades. "She had a gift for seeing what united people, not what separated them," said Nancy. The aspect that most impressed Marcus was discovering that many of the families helped by his grandmother now helped other families in need. She had created a culture of solidarity that perpetuated itself even without her physical presence. "Mrs. Dorothy always said that those who receive help should look for ways to help others," explained Helen. "So when our situation improved, we started looking for families who were going through hard times." During lunch, one of the children asked if Marcus was going to keep bringing Christmas presents like Mrs. Dorothy did. The question caught him off guard. He hadn't considered that his grandmother organized special celebrations. "What were Christmases like here?" he asked. Grace Mitchell offered to explain. "Mrs. Dorothy would turn this cabin into a beautiful party. She'd bring a small tree that we all decorated together, prepare a special lunch, and each child received at least one gift. For many families, it was the only Christmas celebration they could provide for their children. The description moved Marcus deeply. His grandmother had created traditions that gave joy and dignity to children who might have felt excluded from the typical festivities of the season. After lunch, some people began to say goodbye. But a smaller group remained for a more intimate conversation with Marcus. They were his grandmother's closest collaborators, people who regularly helped her with different aspects of the charitable work. Helen coordinated the network of information about families in need. Thomas was responsible for small repairs and maintenance work. Nancy organized the donated clothing and distributions. Richard, with his technical knowledge, helped with issues related to electricity and small fixes. The question we're all asking ourselves, Helen said delicately, is whether there's any possibility of continuing this work in some way. We don't expect you to do exactly what Mrs. Dorothy did, added Thomas. She had years to develop this system, but perhaps we could find a way to maintain at least some support for the most vulnerable families. Marcus felt pressured, but also touched by the dedication of those people. I need to be honest, he said. I'm still processing all of this. I don't know if I have the skills or the calling my grandmother had for this kind of work. Mr. Marcus, Nancy interjected, Mrs. Dorothy always said the most important thing wasn't having abundant financial resources, but rather a heart willing to serve. The rest could be learned and developed. Richard added, It also doesn't have to be a final decision now. Perhaps we could start small, with a few families in the most critical situations, and see how things develop. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a car on the trail. It was Jennifer, his daughter, who had decided to come see for herself what had been keeping her father at the cabin for so long. Dad, she said, stepping out of the car with an expression caught between worry and irritation. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. What's going on here? Jennifer observed the group of people, the remains of the community lunch, the Santos family organizing things inside the cabin, and clearly didn't understand the situation. Who are all these people? She asked, in a tone that Marcus recognized as her military one when assessing a potentially problematic situation. Jennifer, these are some of the families your great-grandmother helped, explained Marcus. They came to tell me about the work she did here. What work? Jennifer seemed confused. Dad, Grandma Dorothy was a retired lady who lived alone in this cabin. What kind of work could she possibly have been doing? Helen stepped forward and introduced herself. Good afternoon, miss. I'm Helen Parker. Your great-grandmother was one of the most important people in our community. She helped my family and many others for years. Jennifer looked at Helen with polite skepticism. What kind of help? Your great-grandmother organized a support system for families in need in the region, explained Thomas. She provided food, clothing, medicine, and even guidance to help people overcome their hardships. Dad, said Jennifer, clearly doubtful, this can't be true. How would Grandma Dorothy have had the resources to do this? She lived on a basic pension. Marcus took his daughter inside the cabin and showed her the notebooks, letters, and documents he had found. Jennifer examined everything with the same meticulous attention he himself had given on the first day. My God, she murmured after reading several letters. This is unbelievable. How did she fund all of this? She worked hard, replied Marcus. She made sweets, sewed, built simple furniture, raised chickens, all to generate extra income that she directed to helping the families. Jennifer stepped out of the cabin in silence and talked for a few minutes with the people who were still there. Marcus watched her asking direct, practical questions, trying to understand the operational details of the system her great-grandmother had created. When she returned, her expression had changed. Dad, I had no idea. These people talk about Grandma Dorothy as if she were a saint. She wasn't a saint, said Marcus. She was a woman who decided to use her life to serve others, and apparently she was very good at it. Jennifer sat in one of the rustic chairs and was silent for a long moment. And now, what do you intend to do with all this? I don't know yet, admitted Marcus, but I'm beginning to understand that maybe this property is much more important than we thought. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That evening, after the families had left, Marcus, Jennifer, and the Santos family had dinner together in the cabin. Jennifer, initially formal and distant, gradually warmed up to Anne, who bombarded her with questions about life in the city. "Do you have children, miss?" asked Anne with her childlike curiosity. "I don't," replied Jennifer, softening her tone. "I work a lot and never found the time to start a family." "That's a shame," said Anne. "You'd be a cool mum. You have kind eyes like Grandma Dorothy." The girl's innocent comment visibly touched Jennifer. After dinner, she helped Carol wash the dishes while they talked about motherhood, work, and the difficulties of balancing personal ambitions with family responsibilities. "It's admirable how you managed to keep a family united, even through so many hardships," said Jennifer to Carol. "It's not easy," admitted Carol. "But Mrs. Dorothy always said that hardships strengthen family bonds when we face them together, instead of letting them pull us apart." Later, when they were alone on the porch, Jennifer confessed her impressions of the day to her father. "Dad, I'm impressed with what we've discovered here. Grandma Dorothy created something truly special." "And now?" asked Marcus. "Do you think we should sell the property?" Jennifer hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know anymore. When I arrived here today, I was convinced you were being too sentimental, but after talking with these families, it's hard to ignore the impact this place has on their lives." "But it's also an enormous responsibility," pondered Marcus. "I don't know if I have the energy or the skills to keep something like this running." "Dad, can I make a suggestion?" "Of course. How about we stay a few more days here? I can take time off work. We can get to know each family's situation better, understand how the system worked in practice, and then make a more informed decision." The suggestion surprised and pleased Marcus. "You would do that?" "I think I owe it to Grandma Dorothy's memory," replied Jennifer. "And I also want to better understand why you're so affected by all this." The next morning, they began a more systematic investigation of Dorothy's work. Jennifer, with her military organization inherited from her father, created detailed spreadsheets with information about each assisted family, family composition, current needs, history of aid received, potential for self-sufficiency. Marcus focused on understanding the practical aspects, where his grandmother bought supplies wholesale, how she organized deliveries, what her sources of income were, how she kept financial records. The Santos family offered to help, serving as guides to the region and facilitators for contact with the families. Julian revealed he had experience in community organization, having participated in mutual support groups in his hometown. During the following week, they systematically visited all the families on Dorothy's list. The panorama that emerged was both inspiring and concerning. On the positive side, many families had achieved stability and were now helping others. The sense of community was strong, and there was a genuine willingness for mutual cooperation. The assistance model created by Dorothy had fostered a self-sustaining culture of solidarity. On the concerning side, there were families in critical situations who depended on regular assistance for basic needs. Without the continuity of support, some children could face nutrition problems, some families could lose their homes, some elderly might lose access to essential medications. "It's quite a responsibility," commented Jennifer after tabulating all the information. "But it's also an opportunity," observed Marcus. "My grandmother proved it's possible to make a real difference in the lives of many families with relatively limited resources." An important discovery was that Dorothy had documented not only her current activities, but also her long-term plans. In a separate notebook, she had sketched ideas to expand the work, creating a community garden, establishing a micro-loan fund, organizing vocational training courses. "She was thinking big," said Jennifer admiringly. "It wasn't just charity, but a community development project." During one of the visits, they met Father Anthony, the parish priest of the local church, who had been one of Dorothy's discreet collaborators. He provided a valuable perspective on the broader impact of her work. "Mrs. Dorothy transformed the mindset of this entire region," said the priest, Before her, families tended to isolate themselves when facing difficulties out of pride or shame. She taught that asking for and offering help are both acts of courage and love. The priest also revealed that Dorothy had left him specific instructions on how to proceed if something happened to her. She knew that one day she would no longer be here, and she worried about the continuity of the work. She asked me to locate you and explain the situation. "Why didn't you contact us before?" asked Jennifer. "Mrs. Dorothy specifically asked me to wait for you to take the initiative to come here," explained the priest. "She said the decision to continue the work should come from an open heart, not from moral obligation." The conversation with the priest clarified something that had intrigued Marcus: how his grandmother had managed to keep the work a secret from the family for so long. She had deliberately chosen not to involve them while she was alive, preferring that they discover it only when they had the emotional maturity to make their own decisions about the legacy. She believed that forcing someone to continue her work would be counterproductive, said the priest. Service to others must come from personal conviction, not external pressure. By the end of the first week, Marcus and Jennifer had a clear understanding of the challenge they faced. They also had a deep appreciation for the sophistication and effectiveness of the system Dorothy had created. But they also had legitimate doubts about their ability to continue the work. Marcus was retired, but had no experience in social work. Jennifer had organizational skills, but lived hundreds of miles away and had her own professional responsibilities. The solution began to emerge through conversations with the very families who were helped. During an informal meeting at the cabin, Helen made a practical suggestion. "Perhaps we don't need one person doing everything Mrs. Dorothy did," she said. "We are many families, and each could contribute something. What we need is someone to coordinate and organize." The idea sparked lively discussion. Julian offered to help with deliveries and physical work. Nancy could continue organizing clothing donations. Richard could teach basic technical skills to young people in the region. "And I can help with the financial and organizational part," offered Jennifer. "I can come here on weekends and use technology to keep everything coordinated from a distance." "And me?" asked Marcus. "You would be the heart of the operation," said Helen. "Mrs. Dorothy always said the most important thing wasn't knowing how to do everything, but genuinely caring about people." The proposal was to transform Dorothy's individual work into a coordinated collective effort, with Marcus serving as facilitator and Jennifer providing logistical support. But there was still one important practical issue: funding. The savings left by Dorothy would last a few months, but not indefinitely. The solution came from an unexpected source. During a casual conversation with the mayor of a neighboring town, Marcus discovered that there were public funds available for community social assistance projects. Dorothy's work, if properly formalized, could qualify for official support. "The problem is that most social projects are started by outside organizations that don't truly understand local needs," explained the mayor. "What you have here is the opposite, a project born within the community itself, with a proven track record of effectiveness." Jennifer became interested in the possibility of formalizing the work as a non-governmental organization, which would open access to various funding sources and partnerships. "We can maintain the personal and community character that Grandma Dorothy created, but with legal backing and more stable resources," she proposed. The idea excited the families. For the first time, they glimpsed the possibility of not only continuing Dorothy's work, but expanding it sustainably. However, an unexpected obstacle arose. Marcus's cousin, Mary, appeared at the cabin accompanied by a lawyer, questioning both the inheritance and the activities being planned for the property. "Marcus, you're being manipulated by these people," Mary said aggressively. "They just want to take advantage of the property and the money Grandma left." The accusation deeply angered Marcus, but before he could respond, Helen spoke up. "Mrs. Mary, with all due respect, you don't know our situation. Mrs. Dorothy helped us for years without ever asking for anything in return. If anyone is being self-interested here, it's not us." "These people will only bring you trouble, Marcus," insisted Mary. "Sell this property, divide the money among the family, and let everyone take care of their own lives." The lawyer accompanying Mary presented documents questioning the validity of the will, claiming that Dorothy was not of sound mind when she drafted it. The situation created a crisis that threatened to destroy everything that had been planned. The families grew worried and began to question whether they should step back to avoid creating problems for Marcus. "Don't worry," Marcus said firmly. "I will resolve this legal matter, and I won't allow the plans we made together to be destroyed by petty ambition." The legal dispute lasted 3 tense weeks. During this period, Marcus had to confront not only the legal challenges, but also his own doubts about whether he was making the right decision. Jennifer became a crucial ally, hiring a lawyer specializing in inheritance law and gathering evidence of Dorothy's mental clarity during her final years. "Grandma Dorothy meticulously documented everything she did," said Jennifer. "These records prove she was perfectly aware and competent when she made the will." The case was resolved when several families offered to testify about Dorothy's lucidity and competence. The judge, impressed by the volume of consistent evidence and testimonies, validated the will and dismissed the challenge. Mary left the proceedings not only legally defeated, but also morally isolated. Her attempt to question Dorothy's mental sanity had deeply offended an entire community that revered the woman's memory. With the legal issue resolved, the plans to formalize and expand the charitable work could proceed. Marcus, Jennifer, and the family's representatives met to officially create the Dorothy Mitchell Organization, dedicated to community social development. The organization's founding ceremony was held in the cabin itself, with the participation of nearly 100 people from the region. Father Anthony blessed the new endeavor, and each participating family made a small pledge of contribution, whether with time, skills, or resources. Mrs. Dorothy always said that miracles happen when ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things, Helen said during the ceremony. Today we are creating the miracle she dreamed of. In the following months, the organization began to operate in an increasingly structured way. Marcus moved permanently to the cabin, which was renovated to serve as an administrative center. Jennifer visited monthly and coordinated bureaucratic and financial aspects remotely. The first major achievement was the creation of the community garden that Dorothy had planned. A plot of land near the cabin was transformed into a collective farming area where families could work together and share the produce. "It's amazing to see how plants grow better when tended by many hands," observed Marcus, contemplating the rows of vegetables flourishing under the collective care. The second initiative was the establishment of a micro-loan fund. With the initial capital left by Dorothy and additional donations mobilized by Jennifer, the organization began offering small, interest-free loans to families who wanted to start their own businesses or invest in professional training. Julian was the first beneficiary, using a loan to buy tools and establish a small home maintenance business. Within 6 months, he had not only repaid the loan, but was also employing other young people from the area. Mrs. Dorothy always said that giving a fish feeds someone for a day, but teaching to fish feeds them for a lifetime, said Julian during an organization meeting. This loan program is teaching our community to fish. The third project was the implementation of training courses. Richard organized basic electronics workshops, Nancy taught sewing and crafts, and other community members shared their specific skills. "What impresses me most," Jennifer said to her father during one of her visits, "is how this work has transformed not only the families we help, but also the helpers themselves. Everyone here has developed a sense of purpose and self-esteem." Marcus was experiencing exactly that personal transformation. His sadness and sense of uselessness had been replaced by energy and determination. He woke up every day with clear goals and the satisfaction of knowing his life was making a real difference. "Margaret would be proud," he murmured to himself one morning, watching the bustle of families arriving to work in the community garden. 1 year after discovering his grandmother's legacy, Marcus was unrecognizable. He had lost weight from the physical work, his graying hair was better kept, and his eyes shone with a vitality they hadn't shown in years. Jennifer had also changed. Her monthly visits had become bi-weekly, and she began considering the possibility of moving permanently to work with the organization. "Dad, "I'm thinking of quitting my job in the city," she said during a conversation on the cabin's porch. "Why?" asked Marcus, surprised. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters. My job at the company pays well, but it has no real meaning. Here, I can see the positive impact of what we do every day." Jennifer's decision was made easier when the organization received a large donation from a local businessman who had heard about the work. With more stable resources, they could hire Jennifer as a full-time administrative coordinator. "Grandma Dorothy always said that when we do what's right, the universe conspires to help us," said Helen when she heard about the donation. This is proof she was right. The organization's growth brought new challenges. With more resources and public recognition came opportunities to expand to other regions, but also pressures to over-bureaucratize the work. "We need to grow without losing our essence," said Marcus during a planning meeting. Grandma Dorothy always kept the focus on personal relationships and individualized care. If we lose that, we lose what makes us special. The solution was to develop a model of organic growth, where new units of the organization were created only when there were local leaders prepared and committed to the original values. 2 years after Dorothy's passing, the organization was serving over 100 families across 5 different communities. But most importantly, each new unit maintained the personal and community character that Dorothy had established. During a special meeting to commemorate the organization's 2nd anniversary, an emotional surprise awaited everyone. Anne, now 10 years old, had written an essay about Mrs. Dorothy for a statewide school competition and won 1st place. "I want to read my essay to you," said Anne, climbing onto a chair to stand taller. "Mrs. Dorothy wasn't rich in money, but she was the richest person I ever knew. She proved that we don't need to have a lot to give a lot. She taught our community that family isn't just who lives in the same house, but who cares for each other. Today, because of her, our whole region is one big family." Anne's essay was published in the local newspaper and later reprinted in regional papers, bringing even more recognition to the organization's work. But for Marcus, public recognition was less important than the personal transformation he had experienced. He had rediscovered his reason for living and built a new set of meaningful relationships. "You know," he said to Jennifer one quiet afternoon, "sometimes I think Grandma Dorothy planned all of this. The will, the letters, even the right moment for me to discover everything." "What do you mean?" asked Jennifer. "If I had discovered her work while at the peak of my military career, I probably would have found it admirable, but wouldn't have gotten personally involved. If I had discovered it right after Margaret's death, I was too depressed to act. But I discovered it exactly at the moment I was ready to channel my pain into something constructive." Jennifer reflected on her father's observation. Maybe Grandma Dorothy understood that everyone has their own right time to discover their life's purpose. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of university students who were making a documentary about community development initiatives. The organization had become a model studied by researchers interested in alternatives to traditional welfare. "What makes you different from other social organizations?" asked one of the students. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I think the difference lies in 2 things. First, our work was born within the community itself, not imposed from the outside. Second, our founder understood that helping people doesn't mean solving problems for them, but rather empowering them to solve their own problems." "And how do you maintain that philosophy as the organization grows?" "By carefully selecting the people who take on leadership positions," replied Jennifer. "We prioritize those who were helped by the work and now want to help others, rather than outside professionals with no emotional connection to our mission." The documentary, when finished, brought invitations for Marcus and Jennifer to speak at universities and conferences about social development, but they were cautious not to be seduced by fame, always remembering Dorothy's example of humility. "Grandma always kept the focus on the work, not the recognition," said Marcus when they declined a particularly prestigious invitation. "If we start dedicating ourselves more to speaking engagements than to the people we serve, we'll be betraying her memory." On the organization's 3rd anniversary, a special ceremony was held to unveil a commemorative plaque at the original cabin. The simple plaque bore only the inscription, Dorothy Mitchell, 1934-2021, taught a community that love multiplied never diminishes. During the ceremony, each family brought a representative to briefly share how Dorothy's work had impacted their lives. The testimonies lasted over 2 hours, and many present wept upon hearing stories of overcoming and transformation. "What moves me the most," said Marcus to those gathered, "is not just the lives Grandma Dorothy changed directly, but the lives that were changed by people she inspired. The impact of a generous life multiplies through generations." As an example, he told of Richard, who had used the technical skills learned at the organization to start a small business that now employed 12 young people from the region. Or about Marina, granddaughter of Mrs. Mary, who had earned a university scholarship and planned to return to work at the organization after graduating in social work. "Every person we help achieve autonomy and dignity becomes capable of helping others," explained Marcus. "That is how Grandma Dorothy's work will live on forever." After the official ceremony, Marcus walked alone to the stone where he had found the box with his grandmother's savings 3 years earlier. The spot now housed a small memorial garden where people often came for reflection and prayer. He sat on the same stone and contemplated all that had happened since that first day when he discovered the letters in the cabin. His life had been completely transformed, and he now understood that the pain of loss could be converted into strength to serve. "Thank you, Grandma," he murmured, touching the commemorative plaque. "You taught me that retirement doesn't mean the end of usefulness, but the beginning of a new way to serve." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the tree under which he sat, and for a moment Marcus felt a comforting presence, as if his grandmother were there, approving all that had been built in her memory. That evening, during the community dinner that concluded the anniversary celebrations, Anne approached Marcus with a question she had been holding on to. "Mr. Marcus, when I grow up, can I work at the organization too?" "Why would you like to do that, Anne?" The girl, now 12 years old and more articulate, answered seriously, "Because I've learned that life becomes more beautiful when we take care of each other." "Mrs. Dorothy taught me that even without me having met her personally." Anne's answer perfectly summarized the most important legacy of Dorothy Mitchell. She had created not just a charitable organization, but a culture of solidarity that would be passed down through generations. "Anne," said Marcus, moved, "I'm sure your borrowed grandma would be very proud to hear you speak like that. And yes, we hope you and many other young people will continue this work in the future." 5 years after discovering the cabin and his grandmother's secret work, Marcus Mitchell had transformed from a lonely, bitter widower into a respected and fulfilled community leader. The organization he helped create served over 200 families in 10 rural communities. But for him, success was measured not in numbers, but in transformed lives and relationships built. Every story of overcoming, every young person who gained an opportunity for study or work, every family that achieved autonomy was a victory that honored Dorothy's memory. Jennifer, now the organization's general coordinator, had found in the Appalachian Mountains not just a new career but also a new life purpose. Her relationship with her father had strengthened through their joint work, and she often commented that she finally understood what it meant to make a real difference in the world. "Dad," she said one afternoon while reviewing financial reports in the cabin, "sometimes I think Grandma Dorothy knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote that letter to you." "How so?" "She knew you needed a new purpose after losing Mom. And I knew I needed to discover that there is life beyond career and money. Somehow she brought us together around something greater than our individual needs." Marcus smiled, remembering the final words of his grandmother's letter about turning pain into a source of healing for others. Dorothy had anticipated not only his grieving process, but also his need to rebuild a sense of purpose in life. "I think Grandma understood something it took me years to learn," he said. "That our greatest achievement doesn't come from what we get for ourselves, but from what we manage to build for others." At that moment, Anne came running up to the cabin with an envelope in her hands. Now 15 and a regular volunteer for the organization, she had become one of the official messengers between headquarters and the various communities served. "Mr. Marcus, a very important letter has arrived." The envelope was from the state capital's City Hall, announcing that the Dorothy Mitchell Organization had been selected to receive an award of recognition for excellence in community social development. "We'll have to travel to receive the award," said Jennifer, reading the official document. "It's an important honor for our entire region." But Marcus hesitated. "I don't know if we should accept it." Grandma Dorothy always avoided public recognition. Helen, who had arrived for a meeting, overheard the conversation and offered a different perspective. "Mr. Marcus, with all due respect, I think this time Grandma Dorothy would want us to accept." "Why?" "Because this award isn't about us. It's about all the families that were helped. It's a way to show the whole country that it's possible to make a real difference with love and organization." Helen's observation convinced Marcus. The award would be accepted not as personal glorification, but as recognition of the community development model that Dorothy had created. The award ceremony was held in the state capitol, in an auditorium filled with political authorities, academics, and representatives from other social organizations. Marcus and Jennifer were accompanied by a delegation of 20 people from the region, including representatives from all the founding families of the organization. During his acceptance speech, Marcus spoke little about himself and much about his grandmother. "This award belongs to Dorothy Mitchell, a woman who proved that we don't need abundant resources to make an extraordinary difference in the lives of many people." He told the story of discovering the cabin, the letters, the meticulously organized notebooks. He spoke about how a simple retiree had created a sophisticated social assistance system that now served as a model for other regions. "My grandmother's most important legacy wasn't what she did, but how she did it," said Marcus. "She understood that true help is the kind that empowers people to help themselves and others. It's the kind that builds community instead of dependency." The speech was met with a standing ovation, and several organizations approached them afterwards, interested in establishing partnerships or replicating the model in their own regions. But for Marcus, the most moving moment of the trip wasn't the official ceremony, but the simple dinner the group had at a popular barbecue restaurant in the capital. Seeing those families who had started in vulnerable situations now traveling as proud representatives of their region was the real prize. "Mr. Marcus," said Julian during dinner, "I wanted you to know that this isn't just an award for you. It's an award for all of us. We've proven that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they work together." The trip back to the Appalachian Mountains was punctuated by conversations about the future. The official recognition had brought new opportunities, but also new responsibilities. Universities wanted to study the model, governments sought support for replication, companies offered significant donations. "We need to be very careful," said Jennifer. "Too rapid growth can destroy exactly what makes us special." Marcus agreed. Grandma Dorothy built everything slowly, based on real relationships and mutual trust. If we try to accelerate too much, we might lose that essence. They decided to establish strict criteria for expansion. New units of the organization would only be created where there was genuinely committed local leadership and community willingness for collaborative work. The model would be shared freely, but the Dorothy Mitchell Organization brand would only be used by groups that demonstrated adherence to the original values. 6 months after receiving the award, the first official unit of the organization outside the Appalachian Mountains was inaugurated in a rural region in the interior of São Paulo. The local founders had spent 1 year studying the model and 3 months working directly at the original headquarters. "It's moving to see Grandma Dorothy's values spreading," said Marcus during the inauguration ceremony. "But it's also a responsibility. Each new unit must maintain the same commitment to genuine relationships and sustainable development." The expansion brought important learnings. Each region had its cultural and economic specificities, requiring adaptations of the original model. But the fundamental principles, relationship building, empowerment for autonomy, collaborative community work, proved to be universally applicable. Anne, now 16 and considering studying social work in university, began systematically documenting the regional adaptations of the model. Her goal was to create a manual that would facilitate future expansions without compromising the essential values. Mrs. Dorothy always said that every community has its own strengths and needs, wrote Anne in her school research project. The secret isn't to copy exactly what she did, but to understand why she did it and adapt those principles to other realities. Anne's project caught the attention of university professors, who invited her to present it at academic conferences. For a young woman who had grown up in an economically vulnerable family, speaking at universities represented an extraordinary transformation. "Mr. Marcus," she said after one of her presentations, "sometimes I can't believe I'm doing this. A few years ago, my family didn't know if we'd have food at the end of the month. Now I'm teaching professors about social development." "Anne," replied Marcus with paternal affection, "you are living proof that Grandma Dorothy was right. When we invest in people's potential, there is no limit to what they can achieve." 10 years after discovering his grandmother's cabin, Marcus Mitchell celebrated his 77th birthday surrounded by over 300 people at the annual party of the Dorothy Mitchell Organization. The organization now operated in 15 U.S. states, always maintaining the decentralized, community-based model. But for Marcus, the numbers were less important than the stories. Stories like Richard's, who had become a technical instructor and trained hundreds of young people. Or Carol and Julian's, whose family had settled in the region and now coordinated one of the organization's most successful units. During his speech at the party, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun with a call from the notary about an unexpected inheritance. "When I first arrived here, I was a man lost in his own sadness," he said. "I thought my useful life had ended along with my military career and the departure of my wife. Grandma Dorothy taught me it's never too late to discover a new purpose." He looked at Jennifer, now a fulfilled 45-year-old woman who had found in the organization not just a career, but an extended family. He looked at Anne, now a social work graduate and coordinator of new projects. He looked at Helen, Thomas, Nancy, and dozens of others who had become family over the years. "The greatest gift Grandma Dorothy gave me wasn't this property or the savings she left," continued Marcus. "It was the understanding that family isn't determined by blood, but by a mutual commitment to each other's well-being." The speech was followed by a special presentation by Anne. She had coordinated an oral history project, recording interviews with elderly residents of the region about how the community had changed since Dorothy's time. "We discovered something interesting," said Anne. "Before Mrs. Dorothy's work, this region had high rates of young people migrating to urban centers. People left their hometowns because they didn't see local opportunities. Today, many young people are choosing to stay because the region offers real opportunities for personal and professional development." The project had documented not only individual stories of transformation, but a significant regional demographic and economic shift. The organization had helped reverse the process of rural depopulation, creating viable alternatives for local development. Mrs. Dorothy proved it's possible to change the destiny of an entire region by starting with one family at a time, concluded Anne. After the celebration, Marcus walked alone to the memorial garden where a small urn containing Dorothy's ashes was buried. It was his annual ritual of gratitude and reflection. "Grandma," he said softly, "I think we managed to honor your legacy. But more importantly, I think we understood your message. You taught us that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, but rather multiplies." Sitting on the familiar stone bench, contemplating the lights of the houses scattered across the valley, many of them homes of families who had been touched by the work started by his grandmother, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. At 77, he had lived many lives: a soldier protecting his country, a devoted husband, a caring father, a lonely widower, and finally a continuer of the legacy of practical love left by his grandmother. Margaret would be proud, he thought, looking at the stars shining over the Appalachian Mountains. She had always believed life's losses could be transformed into sources of healing for others. The next morning, Anne arrived early at the cabin with important news. She had been accepted into a master's program in community social development, where she would write her thesis on the Dorothy Mitchell model. "Mr. Marcus, I want to ask for your blessing on a proposal," she said. "What proposal, Anne?" "I want to propose that the original cabin be transformed into a community leadership school, a place where people from all over the country can come to learn not just the techniques we use, but especially the values that guide us." The idea excited Marcus. It would be a way to multiply the impact without losing the essence. Exactly. Instead of trying to open branches everywhere, we can train local leaders to create their own organizations based on Mrs. Dorothy's principles. Jennifer, who had arrived for an administrative meeting, was enthusiastic about the proposal. We can develop a program that combines theory and practice, where participants work directly with our families while they learn. The Community Leadership School project took 2 years to materialize. When it was finally inaugurated, it was named the Dorothy Mitchell Institute of Community Development and became a national reference for training social leaders. The first class consisted of 25 people from different regions of the United States. For 3 months, they lived in the Appalachian Mountains, working directly with local families while studying theories of social development and community leadership. "What impacts me most about this program," said one participant, "isn't just the techniques we learn, but the personal transformation we experience by living with a community that has truly managed to build real solidarity." Marcus, now 80 years old with completely white hair, still actively participated in the Institute's activities as an advisor and storyteller. His main contribution was helping participants understand that effective community leadership begins with self-transformation and a genuine commitment to the well-being of others. "My grandmother always said, 'We cannot give what we do not have,'" he would often tell the groups. "If we want to build communities based on love and mutual care, we first need to cultivate those values in our own hearts." One of the Institute's most beloved traditions was Story Night, when Marcus would tell about the discovery of the cabin and Dorothy's legacy. Participants of all ages were fascinated by the transformation of a lonely widower into a respected community leader. "The most important message of this story," Marcus would always conclude, "is that it is never too late to discover a new life purpose, and that sometimes our greatest sufferings can become sources of our greatest contribution to the world." End of story. And you, dear listener, have you ever thought about how your own experiences, even the most painful ones, could be transformed into strength to help others? The story of Marcus Mitchell teaches us that true family is built through mutual care and that it is never too late to start over when we find a greater purpose. Share in the comments. What legacy would you like to leave for your community? Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart and inspire real transformations.